Well, folks, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune because it's time for another edition of the Rec Poker Podcast. Thanks for joining us here. This is the forums edition of the Rec Poker Podcast, which means that we're going to take a forum post or a subject from the free learning community at rec.poker and talk about it here on the air. If you don't know what Rec Poker is about, we're a fun-loving, enthusiastic bunch of serious recreational poker players. We love playing the game. We love studying together. We love championing each other's wins and commiserating with each other's losses. Come find your rail at rec.poker. All it takes is an email address and a smile. Most of what we do is free. We have a premium membership that you can try for only $5 by using the code RECPOKER. And after that, it's only $15 a month. But like I say, we're a largely volunteer-based organization. A lot of what we put out there is free and it's available, which is why it's so important that we thank our sponsors, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and Mark Bruchon over at Website Amp. But it's not just the sponsors that are important. It's not just our premium members that are important. The real core team here at Rec Poker, the Wrecking Crew, is the group that gets together. And throughout the month, they provide a lot of the training material. They are active on Discord. They respond in the forum posts. They host the study groups. They're involved with the strategy conversations. It's really what we do here runs through the Wrecking Crew. My name's Jim Reed. I'm Bluffsterini in the home games and at Rec Poker Jim on Twitter. I'm so proud to be one member of the Wrecking Crew, but if you want to find out more about the other fine folks that help me and everyone here at Rec Poker do what we do, you can go to rec.poker/crew, or you can listen up because you'll meet a few of them right here tonight.
Well, I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Twitter or 5x5 in the Poker Stars home game.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I'm Pat Vetter, Fergie56 in the home game, and Pat Vet 33 on Twitter.
And I'm Rob Wasserman. I'm Rabman50 just about everywhere.
And if you don't hear Kim's voice for the next little while, it's because she's working on some technical issues. Kim, we will be here if you need to go and come back, so don't feel any guilt on that front. We will soldier on without you, although your insight is much appreciated in these strategy conversations. So folks who listen to the show often know that here in our premium membership at Rec Poker, we have a different learning theme of the month every month. And that kind of spills into some of our community activities in the podcast and everything else that we do. So this month, November, the theme of the month was responding to 3-bets. And every month, Chris Jones runs a play along seminar where our premium members get together. They play on Poker Now, which is a great site, a free one where you can share your camera. You can have people. In this instance, Chris gives himself the ability to see everyone's cards. We record about 90 minutes of play between a series of Rec Poker Premium members. And then Chris takes some of the hands from that action, crafts a learning seminar based around those hands on the subject of the month. And then even Darrow Kearney comes and leaves his own input, runs it through a solver, and tells our premium members how they could do better. So, like I say, the theme this month is responding to 3-bets. And you might say, well, there's only 3 ways to respond to a 3-bet. You can fold, you can call, or you can 4-bet. And while that is technically correct, you're leaving a lot of kind of nuanced information in between the lines there. So, Chris, why don't you talk to us a little bit about just like what's important about responding to 3-bets and what are some things that you learned while you were putting the seminar together this month?
One of the big things that we did look at was, yes, we have these 3 sort of actions we can take, but the types of hands and the types of spots where we take those actions can vary based on a lot of different factors. And so we really tried to look at the hands that people played, but also looked at some of the theory involved and really looking at things like position and stack sizes and SPR and how big the opening size is, how big the 3-bet is. All these things can sort of factor into our decision making when we decide what is our approach to how much of our range that we opened are we folding, how much of it are we calling with, and how much of it are we choosing to raise with. One of the other things that I think was a big takeaway for me in kind of theory land which I had sort of internalized strategically, but never really maybe this is obvious to everyone else, but it wasn't something that sort of crystallized in my mind until I started really digging into this. Was like the types of hands that we continue with are not necessarily based purely on equity. So equity, if we're looking at like if we take a situation where we looked at a situation where we have where in a 40 big blind effective pot, we have an open from the cutoff and the small blind 3-bets, and it comes back to us in the cutoff. And if we look at that situation, let's say we open to 2.2 big blinds and they raise to 9. Now we have to call 6.8 in order to try to compete for a pot that is now, when we call, up to 20 big blinds. So we would need, technically, if we just look at pure equity, we would need around 34, 35%. We need that amount of equity to make this call if we just lived in equity land. But like a hand like pocket twos has about, against a typical sort of 3-betting range, can have about 39% equity. So why don't we just call all the time with pocket twos? Like why are we full? Like typically, maybe sometimes you get a little spicy with them and you might raise it, but typically if we open pocket twos and we get 3-bet, we might be folding that hand. And so why aren't we calling with that hand? And we talk a lot about that in the seminar. I think it's really interesting, and I had never really crystallized to me, like the reason you're continuing with a hand like maybe ace king or ace queen in some shape, or form, and folding a hand like pocket deuces, even though pocket deuces has an equivalent, even a better equity than some of those ace king, ace queen hands, is because of equity realization, which is the idea of it is harder once we get into a post-flop state to take our pocket twos and get them to showdown, because the only real way we're going to do that is by hitting a deuce. Otherwise they're going to be tremendously hard to play because every card above ours is going to be an overcard. We're never going to know where we're at. And they're just much, much harder to get to showdown. So there are these kinds of hands and things that you have to think about when you're defending 3-bets that go beyond sort of those really basic sort of equity calculations. And I thought that was a really good sort of conversation we had. I think that's maybe where I would start.
Yeah, I'm always interested in like the factors that we consider in the moment of those, because responding to 3-bets is a very levels of poker aspect of the game, because when you're opening, your open range is almost entirely determined by your stack size and your position, and maybe who's in the big blind. But it's kind of like a personal decision what your opening range is going to be in any given spot. But once someone 3-bets you and now you're responding to the 3-bet, it's really a lot more about them. It's not really about you anymore. It's really about like what kind of player has 3-bet me, what range of hands are they going to choose to 3-bet me with, what kind of hands how are they going to play post flop with different parts of their range. And so I think it's a real mistake for us to get into this kind of cookie cutter approach of saying like, these are the hands I 4-bet with, these are the hands I call 3-bets with, because you pointed out at the very beginning, like stack size is going to be really important, and the other people in the hand, there are going to be other people in the hand, and you kind of know who they are, and so that can influence your decision a lot more.
And if you're in position or out of position, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're you raise in early position and you get 3-bet by the button or the cutoff, that's a much different animal than being 3-bet by the small blind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Rob, like when you're the open raiser, let's say if you're under the gun, you're going to have a range, more closer to 10%, and if you're on the button, it's going to be closer to 40%. When you're facing a 3-bet, does it matter? How do you factor in sort of like your own position and your own range in that kind of a thing? Like when you're, I know when, under the gun in early position, you're going to have fewer hands that you're folding, just because you're opening a tighter range there as well. So do you find that affects how you respond to three bets as well?
Well, yeah, because your opening is going to be stronger hands, obviously, from under the gun than you are, say, from the cutoff. And then again, is it the small blind that's three betting me, or is it the button? You know, because if I'm going to be out of position in the hand, that's going to also affect the hands that I'm going to continue with. Because to Chris's point, equity realization has a lot to do with the position. Mm-hmm. So you are in a much better position to realize your equity from the button, no matter what, because you have position all the way through the hand. So if I'm, like I say, if I'm going to be in position in the hand, then I'm going to be able to play a wider or call a wider range of hands than I would if I was going to be out of position in the hand.
So, Chris, we're kind of talking about how there's all these different factors. Where can we start, or like what's kind of like the decision making process that we're going through when we're facing a three bet? So you said like knowing what your stack size or the effective stack and sort of making some assumptions about your opponent. But talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we want to look at first thing are effective stacks, like and the SPR. Like, can I even reasonably, if this three bet isn't all in, right? If they've three bet me but not all in, do I even have the option of calling? Like sometimes it's so awkward, and somebody might make an awkward three bet where it's just like this is sort of not even so. But let's put that aside. Let's just say that there's a reasonable stack in play, and now the question is, what are the kinds of hands that we're going to fold, and what are the kinds? And I think that's the best place to start. Really, is there's going to be a class of hands that we're going to want to continue with, either through a four bet or through a call. So let's start to eliminate the hands that we know we can just at least get rid of. At least that's where I would start. And I think what we want to look for, so equity realization is a big one. Like, is this hand, whether I'm going to be in position or out of position, going to be one that I can, because the only way I'm going to actually win with this now is to get my opponent to fold or to get to showdown and actually show a winner. And so is this a hand that I can carry through, that has some playability for me post flop, that I can carry on with in what's going to be what we have to remember about three bet pots is that ranges are tighter and more constrained, and if we get into a post flop spot, our range that we're going to have, like, they're going to be closer in equity to our opponents. So we might still have the advantage.
And Chris, you just mean because neither player has much garbage in their range at this point, because
right.
It's not going to be range is tighter.
Like a button open and a big blind defend. Now everyone's got just trash, and they're wide ranges, and they're hard to figure out, or a small blind completes and the big blind checks. Now, I mean, those ranges are not what we're talking about here. These are very tight, strong ranges that'll have they'll have some of those speculative hands on board, but there's not going to be a lot of trash here in general, unless we're, some opponents maybe, but in general, certainly from the three, when we continue, the three bet aggressor might have more trash than the three bet defender.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, so these ranges are just going to be really constrained. And that's just something we have to remember as we get into these post flops situations, because we have to play them differently than we would, maybe the bread and butter post flop situations that we're used to. And that is a mistake that I see a lot of players make. That they approach, they think, okay, well, there was a 3-bet and I called it, but now we're post flop. I've been in post flop situations before. I'm going to treat this like I was the cutoff. I opened and the big blind called, and now away we go. And it's a bunch of high cards. Well, you can't have much, so I'm gonna go after you, even though I don't have anything either. And that is just not the kind of approach we can have in these spots, because our opponent can have a lot of those strong holdings in this spot, and their range is going to be tilted towards that versus that like big blind defend range. Does that make sense? I feel like does that make sense?
No, it makes sense to me.
Totally.
I mean, you're getting post flop with, if you're the one responding to the 3-bet, then you've already, when you chose to open, you limited your range by only opening the top X number of hands that you would in that position. And then when you're facing the 3-bet, you've folded some of those hands as well. So you're getting post flop with a much tighter and stronger range of hands, and that's going to intersect with some of those medium and high boards a lot better than a wider range would. So how do you choose, Chris, which hands to call with, which hands to fold, and which hands to 4-bet? And what should we be thinking about when we're trying to decide what to do with those?
Well, so let's we talked about this in the seminar. I think it's an interesting topic for conversation. So, because like this, I think can give us some general principles. Let's say we've got a situation, it's all the same, right? We are in the middle position. We're in the hijack. We open, we get 3-bet by the small blind. It comes back to us. When we have an 80 big blind stack, a 50 big blind stack, and in a 20 big blind stack, we've been shoved on, presumably. Where do you think we fold the most at GTO? Which of those, when we get 3-bet in these spots, we're in the hijack, we had 80 big blinds, 50 big blinds, 20 big blinds. Which of those stacks do you think fold the most to the 3-bet?
I'm guessing it's the middle stack, the 50 big blind one. My theory is that the 20 big blind ones, we just don't have enough chips back to kind of worry about having a second best hand. And at 80 big blinds, we've got enough big blinds back that we can call with some speculative hands and kind of crack the strong range of the 3-better. So my guess would be it's that 50 big blind range we do the most of our folding. What about you guys, Rob? Again?
I think it depends more on the person doing the 3-betting.
Yes.
Because I'm going to look at the type of range that I expect them to have. Now, Old Man Coffee, he's only doing that with aces, kings, and ace king. I know that for a fact because that was me for many, many years. I would never 3-bet anything other than aces, kings, or ace king. Now I'm much wider today than I was then, but there's people like that they're only gonna, and I see them in our home game. I see them online that when they're 3-betting, they don't feel comfortable 3-betting anything except for the very strongest parts of their range. So now all of a sudden I can make a decision of probably folding a lot more of my range than I would against, say, Chris. If Chris is going to 3-bet me, I know that he's going to have the type of range that I can play against with more hands.
Oh, yeah, guy's a maniac.
So, yep. Well, he's not I don't think he's a maniac, but he's capable of having he's capable of having a more polarized range. Maybe not in the small blind. The small blind, I think you're going to play a little bit more linear range if you're going to 3-bet, but I still think that he's going to have a much wider range than an Old Man Coffee. So that allows me to play a much wider range of my opening hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we definitely want to make this opponent dependent, but I was kind of like, when I was asking the question, I was thinking more, and one of the reasons I like to ask about this at a GTO, and I know nobody we know plays GTO, but we can learn a lot from GTO strategy in terms of like how we approach these things and think about them at least. And I think one of the things that's maybe more evident as we talk about it, but kind of interesting, is it's actually, because it's such a big bet, it's actually that short stack where we're going to be folding the most. Because it's a instead of like a 7 or 8 or 9 big blind bet, and it's not threatening our entire stack, we need a much stronger range to call this off at that short stack. So that I thought was sort of interesting as well, just as kind of thinking about how much of our range we're actually going to fold. But I think potentially what's maybe more interesting is, okay, if we look at that 80 big blind range and that 50 big blind range, and we looked at a hijack open and a small blind 3-bet, and we look at the hijack, so they actually are folding similar amounts of hands. It's folding a little bit more at the 80 big blind range. It's like 41%, and we're folding 41% or 42% at the 80 big blind range, and we're folding like 36% at the 50 big blind range. So there's not much. There's not many. We're folding a little bit more when we're deeper stacked, which sort of also makes sense because we don't want to get ourselves into a lot of trouble, so we're folding some of those more marginal holdings. But I think one of the interesting things is when we compare the types of hands that we are folding, they change a little bit. It's not just like, oh, we're taking that, whatever that 40% that we're folding at 80, and we're just chopping off or we're adding in a few more because we're folding a little bit less at 50 big blinds. We're actually thinking about the types of hands that play better at a deeper stack versus a sort of a middle stack versus a shallower stack. So we actually want to start to think about the types of hands that we fold when we're shallow, middling, and deep stacked. And I don't want to get into all the specifics of it. We talked about it, but that is something that can then start to, if we look at this as GTO, it's not that we necessarily always play GTO, but it can start to build some of that foundational theory on which we build our own strategy, right? And we can say, well, there are types of hands that I'm supposed to continue with when I'm deep that are very different than the types of hands I'm supposed to continue with when I'm shallow. And whether that continuing is through a raise or through a call is another topic for conversation. But that is the beginning, I think, of starting to really think about this in a more nuanced and deep level, is to really think about those kinds of differences. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the frequency with which you fold doesn't change that much, but the set of hands that you fold differs a bit according to the qualities of those hands. So can you kind of generalize a little bit and say, if you were shorter stacked, you might fold more of these kind of hands, but if you were deeper stacked, instead, you might fold some of these kinds of hands, and what those hands might have in common?
Yeah, so when we look at this, I'm just actually pulling it up just to make sure I'm not leading us astray. But
that's my job.
So I said, okay, we're folding 42% of hands when we are 80 big blinds deep and 36% when we are 50 big blinds deep. But when I look at the hands that are folds, and maybe I should even, should I share my screen?
Yeah, sure. You. I mean, yeah, folks, if
I know that people can't see, but we can kind of describe it as we go because it might just be helpful for everyone to see.
Yeah, and we do put these out. There is a video version. If you're listening at home, you can go to YouTube and
I'll remind you about your audio. I gotta have access.
Oh yeah, okay. Here, we'll stop sharing for a second. So while Chris is sharing his screen, I'll just say that, yeah, folks, if you're listening along, feel free to just click pause and go find a computer that you can load up YouTube on. And we do a YouTube video version for all of these episodes as well these days. So you can go and see the screen. So Chris has put up GTO Wizard here, and he's going to talk a little bit about what the display shows us all here.
So here we are. We're a hijack. We've opened. Small blind has 3-bet us. and we have a decision to make, and I have just singled out our folds, right? So these are the hands we're folding. We're folding 42%, and I just kind of look at them, and I'll click off this so you can see the rest of the range that we're actually doing something else with. You know, we're calling, we're raising, we're doing something else with. It's everything that's not gray, basically.
And this is our entire opening range and how the different parts of it respond to the 3-bet, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so,
okay, right.
So this is kind of what that range looks like. And you can see it's really targeted in this kind of like these kind of like lower suited hands, which, you know, we don't have anything else that we're doing anything with. So it's like the queen 9 suiteds, the queen 8 suiteds, the king 8 suiteds, the king 7 suiteds, the king 5 suiteds. A lot of these we're ejecting, as well as some of these really kind of terrible offsuit Broadway hands, the kinds that can get us into some like lots of trouble, like the ace 10, the king 10s, queen 10, jack 10, queen jack, king jack. These are the kinds of hands that we're ejecting, right?
And what people will notice if they're paying attention here is that it's typically the lower ranked of the cards that is becoming the factor here. So like we're continuing with king queen, but we're folding king jack and king 10. We're folding, you know, queen 7 suited, queen 8 suited, but we're continuing with queen 10 suited, queen jack suited. So it really is it's those, if you can envision the graph that you see, you know, that little arrow going up towards the top left, it's those hands that are kind of around the edge of that arrow. Those are the ones that are getting folded. It's a pretty linear progression here.
And then some of our really bottom pairs, but because we're deep, a lot of these bottom pairs, like the 5s and the 4s, they're barely being folded, right? Like the deuces get folded a lot. 3s are still more often something else besides folding, and then every other pair is in it to win it, basically. Right? So I want you to look especially at these bottom pairs as we go over into, let's see, did I do this right? Where am I? Yes, 50 big blinds. Okay. So now we're looking at this, and this part looks fairly similar, but we have started to do something with some of these kinds of holdings. And, you know, some of these other, like, these kinds of hands start to become interesting little weird 4-bets and things like that come into play.
Hands like suited kings and low suited aces.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Not everyone can see. So
no, that's okay.
Great.
Yeah, king 5, king 6, king 7 suited, where we were folding them in the earlier example. Now at this stack depth, we're continuing in some way with them, whether calling or 4-betting.
Right. And part of that reason is, and you'll notice if I do this now, let's keep going with this. Let's go down to 35 big blinds and go hijack open, small blind raises. Now we're back in the hijack. Now we're looking at the folding range. Now you're seeing, you know, a lot of these are starting to sneak in. The ace 10 has snuck in. Ace jack has snuck in. A lot of these king 7s and king 8s are starting to show up as calls rather than folds. So there's been a change, and then if we kind of keep going even further,
and this is just as the stack depth gets lower, we're actually getting stickier with some of these high card hands. Is that fair way of assessing it, Chris?
Right. And now once we get really shallow, we're starting to, you'll notice that none of these sort of ace-x suited hands start to find themselves as folds. This is again at GTO. Like, I'm not recommending you play this way because we're rarely often playing against GTO opponents, but I think it's interesting to see how these ranges start to change as stacks get shallower. And if you have access to something like Range Trainer Pro, if you have access to GTO Wizard, if you have access to some of these charts, this can be a really good practice to start to look at what are the types of hands that change as stacks get shallower, because this can help you start to sort of adjust your own approaches and your own ranges.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm always, on all the HUDs that I've put together, the stack size is always the biggest, most obvious stat, the live stack size in big blinds, because I just think it's the most important factor when it comes to a lot of poker decisions. But particularly in this kind of arena, you can see how impactful it is. So that's really interesting to see how much it changes that kind of a thing. So that describes kind of some of the hands that we're going to release when we face a 3-bet. It's going to be kind of some of those fringe hands, and you can, it's a combination of their rank and how playable they are. When we are going to continue, is there something that the hands that we continue with have in common, or the ones that we choose to call versus 4-betting? And I know position matters a lot, so it's going to be harder to get into to apples and apples here. But can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Let's do this. I'll do it one more time, and now I'll show you. We're going to look at these same ranges, and I think this is where it starts to become even more stark or more interesting. Okay, here we are at 80 big blinds. What do you notice about we're in the hijack, we've been 3-bet. What do you notice here?
Well, we're really not purely folding much at all. A lot of these are continuing in some way. Some either as a call. Looks like a lot of calls, I would say.
Yeah, that's the big thing. That's the big thing to notice. So we already talked about the kinds of hands we're ejecting, but of the hands we're continuing with, and you should ask yourself if you're doing this, because I probably am not. I'm probably not doing this as much as I should either. But at GTO, if we're playing against a GTO computer or somebody who's really playing close to theory, we are calling a ton when we're deep stacked. Mm-hmm. We're only taking an aggressive action with 7 or 8% of our hands. And
this is, in this example, we are in position, right, Chris? We're in the hijack.
Right, we're in the hijack against
small blind.
So right. And that would radically change if we were out of position. But,
yes.
But let's just change this down to 40. Let's just have our stacks. Hijack open, small blind, and we're still calling a lot. We're folding less, and now we're starting to raise all in more. But
go back to the 80. Go back to the 80 for a minute. An interesting thing about the aggression and where you see the aggression, is aces, kings, ace, king suited are the only hands that we are raising some of the time, but we're calling more of the time than we are raising. And then it's interesting that the all-in from 80 big blinds, we're actually going all-in at some frequency with jacks, queens, and ace-king offsuit, which I think is very interesting. So that's where your aggression is coming from. None of the other hands, we're not finding any bluffing aggression here to speak of. It's all very high-value hands.
Yep. That's right.
When we're 4-betting here, there's it looks like a 4% of the range is continuing to a not all in 4-bet, and about 3.5 for just jamming. I would have told you that 80 big blinds seems very deep, but when even in position, that's when you've got a balanced range, it's gonna have that in there. And yeah, you're right, Rob. I think ace 8 suited has a couple.
Yeah, it has nominal. It's doing it at 9%.
10%
so there's
of the time. Yeah.
And this is where you get the it's a computer that's well, I've got to balance myself somehow. So I'm going to raise a little bit of ace 8. And this is stuff a human brain probably can't even accomplish that much. But when you see the aggressive actions here, it's a very strong linear. range
Jacks,
here.
Jacks plus an ace king, right? I mean, there's not even
right.
it's.
I mean, this is the old man coffee raising range.
It is.
And I don't know how many humans are actually going to call very often with aces, ace king suited, or king king.
Right.
Most at 80 big blinds, most of the time you're going to try to raise again to see if you can get the guy to commit.
Yep. That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And so then let's look at I think then, because it is really interesting to then look at this difference. So the difference here at 40 big blinds, we've just halved it. Now we have a lot of more bluffing candidates. We have ace 5 suited, ace 7 suited, tens, jacks, queens, king jack suited, ace queen offsuit, all of our ace kings. And we're still flatting with aces and kings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, you may not play this way. It may not work in your game, but it is interesting to start to realize that, okay, now that we're in this sort of middling stack, we have more opportunities to both polarize ourselves, but also trap with some of our best hands, where we just flat with those. Those protect some of our flatting range so that we can flat with some of these other suited connectors, the queen tens, the jack nines, the jack tens, suiteds, and our aces and kings. It allows us to sort of think about these spots a little bit differently.
And if you think about our games, if you raise all in with some of these hands like ace 5 suited, ace 7 suited, king jack suited, ace queen offsuit, pocket eights, you're going to raise all in. A lot of times a 4-bet all in, it seems very, very strong in the games that we play. And people are going to put you on aces and kings. And it has been, and GTO has you actually just calling those aces and kings.
Right. And as long as they don't all know that, then you're in decent shape.
Well, that's what I mean. That's why you can get away with raising with those, because in the games we play, people are going to think you got aces or kings more of the time, and they're going to have even a narrower calling range.
I think it's really interesting that at 40 big blinds, we don't have a 4-bet range that's not all in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is also very interesting.
Well, what would that sizing be?
Right. And that is the question. I guess it would be almost a min click, right? If we did it.
Right, because if we're 3-betting, or if the 3-bet is like 8 or 9 big blinds.
Well, it says it's 7.8. So if we went to 20, it's half your stack, right?
Yeah,
that's
so
16 or 17,
right.
Then.
And then you have much less you have less than a pot size bet left for the flop, which is
right. But do we ever have like a 4-bet fold? Well, obviously in GTO land, we don't. We either call or we shove all in.
Mm-hmm.
If we're gonna stay in the hand, if we're not gonna fold.
And it's interesting. It gave it a raise. The raise option was to 14, that sizing. So maybe I can't imagine though if you gave a solver the option. We could try to run it sometime, but if you gave it a little bit of a larger sizing, I doubt it would pick that, but it might. That would give you potentially some. It feels really ugly to raise that much and then fold, but
yeah, I could see us like exploitatively doing that when we knew we were never going to fold with exactly hands like aces or kings or something.
Trying to induce.
Yeah, to induce or to make a trivial to create some trivial decisions post flop when the SPR is so low. But that's not going to be. You're not going to be able to balance that effectively. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
So, I mean, and that's some of the stuff we talk about in the seminar. I think, we'll let people dig deep into that a little bit more there. But I think that's where I think it's really good to start. If we can start by looking at some of these GTO examples, these are not then sort of our guideposts. they're not the thing that they'll be like, oh, I'll memorize this chart and play exactly this way. That's not what we're saying. And as Rob described earlier, we've got to take a real estimation of our opponent. That's going to really inform some of our decisions. But what we can learn from these charts is, okay, well, these are the kinds of hands that they're folding at equilibrium. So that can at least start to inform my strategy. And then I can adjust based on all those other factors that are coming into play. And maybe sometimes I will be being much more aggressive or much tighter, but I can at least understand how I'm starting to base my play. This is the work that I think modern poker is taking us towards. It's the work we need to do. It's the kind of study that's actually, you can learn a lot of things. There's a lot of like eye-opening things that you see when you start digging into these kinds of charts and sort of like figuring them out.
Yeah, and we're looking here at GTO based solved charts so that we can learn some kind of pure strategy in the games that we're playing. We had Ryan LaPlante on the show a few weeks ago, and he was talking about responding to 3-bets because it was the theme of the month. And he really reinforced how villain dependent this was, right?
Yeah,
like how important it was who you were playing against, like Rob is saying here earlier, because people don't respond to 3-bets or 4-bets in a balanced way. Typically, this is going to be an area where people will make mistakes. They'll either be too tight or too loose with the wrong hands. And so if you've got someone who's always folds to 4-bets, then you should be 4-betting them with more of the blocker kind of ace-5, ace-7 kind of hands. If you have players that never fold to 4-bets, then you don't need to have a balanced range here. Just hammer them with the top of your range, and you might not even include ace-king in that range necessarily, depending on what they're continuing with. We could not cover this subject in one podcast episode, and we're not going to try. A lot of the more nuanced stuff, you can go to rec.poker, get a free community account. There have been a lot of forum posts about this. Discord has been buzzing about the different hand histories that we've talked about along this line. There's a bunch of free videos on YouTube you can check out for this. But the premium content for this month has really been based around this subject. So we go much, much deeper into responding to 3-bets in some of the premium material that's available at Rec Poker this month. Why don't we just leave our audience with a few sort of like just general rules that they can use when they're facing 3-bets, and then we'll wrap this baby up and let everyone get home to their families. So like for me, for instance, I'm always just thinking about, stack size, like you say, is the most important thing. Do we have room to 4-bet without shoving? And not often in the tournaments that we're going to be playing is that the case. When you get deep stacked, maybe that's something we can worry about balancing a little more. But the range of hands that our opponents are 3-betting us with is obviously crucial. If you see some kind of maniac who's 3-betting a lot, they're going to be a better candidate for some of these lighter 4-bets because they're going to have some more folds in their range than someone who only ever 3-bets you with queens plus and ace king. So that would be one for sure. And then whether you're in position or out of position might affect the hands that you choose to call with. You might call with some more suited, more connected hands that would have to find either a fold or a 4-bet otherwise to continue with them. And if you were out of position, when you're in position, you can call with some of those more speculative hands that will be more flop dependent than some of the other ones. What about you guys? Is there anything else? Yeah, Rob.
I think one of the things that I like to do when I'm raising first in is kind of look at the opponents that are left to act, and are they liable to be 3-betting? And then I want to know when I make that raise first in what my response is going to be to a 3-bet. A lot of times the hands that I'm opening and I get 3-bet, I know for a fact I'm just going to fold right away. It's just, there's no thinking about it. Then it's based on the opponents, because you're thinking ahead to the opponents that are that are left to act, are they liable to three bet? And if this player three bets, and it has a lot to do with the stack sizes of the different players too, because you're going to respond differently to a three bet from a 30 big blind stack than you are from a 60 big blind stack. So I kind of like to look at that when I'm making my raise first in.
Mm-hmm. And I'll even go one step further than that. Every time you consider opening a pot, we always say, look left and see how interested the players to your left are in the hand. If you have an aggro maniac a couple seats to your left, this subject of responding to three bets, we talk about it as though it happens after you've opened and gotten three bet. But like Rob says, it's not even a question of knowing how you're going to respond. You might choose just not to open that pot. You might, if you've got very active three betting opponents to your left, that can act, if you're being smart about it, that can influence your opening range. And maybe you just don't even bother opening some of those hands that you're often going to have to fold to a three bet. That's an even better way to save some chips. And it also means that when you do respond to three bets, you're doing it with a stronger range. So you're going to do it with a range of hands that are more comfortable calling or four betting. And that's, obviously stronger ranges are better for a lot of the decisions you can make in poker.
And to add to that, one other thing that I think as recreational players, we have to sort of start to recognize, especially if we're playing in tough fields where there are really strong players, pros in the field, we are going to have some targets on our backs until we figure this out. A lot of really strong players are going to be three betting, and we can identify the players as they're only going to be three betting, queens plus and ace king, and that's a pretty easy player to play against. But if you're ever frustrated at the table, like you feel like you're being targeted, somebody keeps three betting you, or a whole table keeps three betting you, and there's a bunch of strong players there, and it's really frustrating. They might be. They may not be. True. They may not be, but they might be. And part of the reason that might be happening to you is I do talk to some recreational players who I think always in the games that they play, if you find yourself in one of these tough games or a table that's tough, and the game you normally play is people only three bet when they have queens plus and ace king, your learned response to that behavior is to fold a lot. And when you get into a tougher game, you're going to have to learn a different set of behaviors. You're going to have to learn to sometimes four bet light if you're being three bet too often, sometimes defend with really reasonable speculative holdings, and be able to carry that with you, especially in position, carry that with you post flop and make this pro take some really awkward lines with their kinds of holdings, and stop assuming that these players always have aces and kings when they do this, because they don't. So,
well, let's leave our audience with one arrow in their quiver that they can always use responding to three bets. If you feel like you're in a position like this where someone's three betting you more widely than would be advised, light four betting is really the best weapon that you can bring to that fight. Just calling and then folding when you don't make a hand post flop is not helping you. If they're three betting too much and you're just calling pre-flop and then folding post flop when you don't hit a flop, you're just putting more money in their pocket than if you'd folded. So folding, light four betting is really your only way to kind of tell them to leave you alone, and they will. If they see you four betting a bunch, they're going to counter exploit by tightening up their three betting range, and that's a better place for you to be. As we've looked at, when your four betting range is pretty tight already. So even in a vacuum, your four betting range is pretty tight. And even if it was only value hands, it's not that many combos, right? It's like queens plus and ace king. So you don't need a lot of bluffs or semi bluffs to balance that small combo range. It's not like even we talk about balancing an opening range, or we talk about balancing a 3-betting range. A 3-betting range has a lot more combos than a 4-betting range, so it's going to have a lot more bluffs in it. When we looked at the chart there, it sort of looked at ace 5 suited, ace 7 suited. Those were the only real bluffs. Pocket eights. It's hard for me to say. If you were to tell me that I could only choose a couple hands to 4-bet bluff with, it would be with those kind of bad suited aces that have a blocker value, so they make it less likely that my opponent's 3-betting with a very strong hand. And then they have a lot of playability post-flop because they can make the wheel straight or they can make the nut flush. So you get to be very selective, I guess is what I'm saying. You get to be very selective with the hands that you choose to 4-bet light with. And you don't have to worry about doing it that often because you're not going to be 4-betting for value that often. So don't feel like you're have to really reach in down the bottom of the barrel to find some good candidates for that. What about you guys? Like, do you have hands that you like to 4-bet light with, or is it always just kind of a sliding scale of how wide you think their 3-betting range is, or anything like that? Like for me, it's the suited aces. I can't help.
Yeah, I mean, I like those hands. And actually, I can think of an example from yesterday. There was an opponent who was just wildly doing this way too much. And I had a HUD, so I could tell. And and I saw some showdown, and I was like, okay, all right, this player just loves the 3-bet, just loves it. And in that case, I was like, well, I have to open this up even more. And against that kind of opponent, I actually like having, ace blockers are nice for a normal or even a slightly aggressive player, but against a really wild player, I like to have a little bit of value. So that's where I like those kinds of pocket 6s, pocket 7s, pocket 8s, pocket 5s.
Of course.
Where I know that their range is so wide, and if I get called, I still have a value that's going to beat everything that's not paired. Mm-hmm. And so those are some that against maniacs that I will slip in as my 4-betting range. I don't, because like those might be hands that we more speculatively just call with and see if we hit a set, and can stack somebody if they have aces. But if they're that wild and crazy, they're not going to have aces as often. And I did a very big 4-bet bluff with pocket 6s yesterday against a kind of player like this. I shoved for about 50 big blinds against their 3-bet, and I got the fold, and I felt good about it. I did not, and it felt like the right play. And so like, I think opponents dependent, we can make those kinds of plays. And those are the kind of hands I'll start to add after those ace X suited type hands, are those sort of like middling pocket pairs that I don't really want to get against. Some players I'd like to take them into the streets with. Against some players that are maniacs, I just want to get the hand over with and take my equity and run with it.
Yeah. And then again, just you're probably going to call more in position, which means you're going to 4-bet or fold more out of position. So whatever hands you might choose for it, that's just another kind of general rule that people can use to make that.
I think in general, the games I play, I don't see that aggressive 3-betting going on. So I haven't had a lot of practice 4-bet bluffing.
Right.
Because the 3-bet ranges are very, very tight in most of the scenarios that I find myself in. So
yeah. Well, and if they're not 3-betting, and listen, some players don't think far enough ahead to have a 3-bet range that includes hands they're going to fold to a 4-bet. So if they're just going to continue with all the hands that they 3-bet with, don't bluff into them. because they ain't folding. So you can have all the pre-flop equity and the blockers and everything you want in the world, but sometimes you just gotta like look at the player across the table and make a decision there too. That's what a lot of this stuff comes down to. All right, well, thanks, Chris. Again, I'll say if you want to learn a lot more about this kind of stuff, go head over to rec.poker, get a premium account, use the code RECPOKER to get your first month for only $5, and then check out the video archive and you can catch up on all the stuff that we've been doing here. So my thanks to Chris Jones, of course, to Kim and Rob for coming along. And I almost did it. I almost got there, gang. Here we go, hitting our audio cues like a professional. Of course, we have to thank the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino and Mark Pershawn from Website Amp. But the most important person is you, the one listening right now. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. I was so close that time, Kenny. Have a good night.